there are some graves you learn not to look at too long. My name is Director Callaghan, and I've managed Riverside Memorial for 23 years. In that time, I've walked every path, memorized every section, and learned that cemeteries have rhythms, predictable patterns of maintenance, visitation, and seasonal change. Row 9, Section C has never fit that pattern. Plot 14 in particular. It's been reserved since 1997 by a family trust, paid in full, never used. The paperwork lists a surname Hendricks, but no first name, no date of birth, nothing else. Just a plot number and a check that cleared decades ago. I first noticed something wrong on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was doing my usual rounds, checking for damaged markers and overgrown plots, when I saw fresh soil on row 9C14. Not like someone had been digging, more like the earth had been compressed, walked on recently. The grass around it looked trampled in a perfect rectangle, the exact dimensions of a grave. I checked my records on my phone. Nothing scheduled. No burials in that section for 3 weeks. I assumed it was kids cutting through at night, maybe using the empty plot as a shortcut. We get that sometimes. I made a note to have the groundskeeper reseed the area and moved on. The next morning, there were flowers. A simple bouquet of white roses, still wrapped in cellophane from a grocery store, laid directly in the center of where a headstone would go. The grass was compressed again, and this time I could see footprints in the dew, small, like a woman's shoes, leading to the plot, and then away toward the east gate. I picked up the flowers. They were fresh, bought within the last day, no card. I checked the security footage that afternoon. Our cameras cover the main gates and the office, but not the individual sections' budget cuts years ago. The east gate camera showed nothing unusual. No one came through between closing at dusk and opening at dawn. I told myself someone must have come during visiting hours, and I just missed it. People grieve in strange ways. Maybe someone was mourning a Hendricks family member, got confused about the location. It happens. But the flowers kept coming. Every morning for a week, a new bouquet. Always white roses. Always in the same spot. Always when no one should have been able to enter. I started checking the footage obsessively, scanning every frame. Nothing. I even came in early one morning at 5, walking the grounds with a flashlight looking for whoever was doing this. That's when I saw her. She was standing at the edge of row 9C, barely visible in the pre-dawn gray, wearing a long, dark coat. I called out, asked if she needed help. She didn't turn. She just walked slowly toward plot 14, knelt down, and placed another bouquet on the grass. I started toward her, maybe 50 feet away, and she stood and walked toward the tree line at the back of the cemetery. By the time I reached the trees, she was gone. I checked the footage later that morning. Nothing. The timestamp showed me walking around at 5:47, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark, but no one else. No woman, no figure. Just me, alone, talking to empty air. I pulled the original purchase records for the plot that afternoon. The file was thin, just a single contract signed in 1997 by someone named Evelyn Hendricks. No address, no phone number. I ran the name through our database. Nothing. I tried the county records office, Social Security, obituaries. No Evelyn Hendricks in our area, living or dead. Then I found the registry anomaly. Our burial registry is digital now, but we keep the old handwritten logs in storage. I went down to the basement and pulled the ledger from 2003. There, in faded blue ink, was an entry for row 9C14. Date of burial, October 19th, 2003. Name, Evelyn Grace Hendricks. Cause of death, not listed. Officiant, not listed. The handwriting didn't match any of our staff from that time. But according to our digital records, that plot has always been empty. I compared every page of the physical log to the digital files. Row 9C14 appears in the handwritten version, marked as occupied, marked as filled, but it was never transferred when we digitized in 2008. An oversight, maybe. A clerical error. Except there's no headstone, no death certificate on file, no record of a funeral service. I went back to the plot that evening, after we closed. I brought a soil probe, the kind we use to check ground stability before burials. I pushed it into the earth at the center of the compressed rectangle. It went down smooth for about 3 feet, then hit resistance. Not rock, something softer, more structured. I pulled the probe out. The tip was stained dark, and there was a smell like old fabric and damp wood. I didn't dig. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew what I'd find. Maybe because I didn't want to know for certain. I sealed the area off the next morning, told the groundskeeper it was a subsidence issue, needed surveying. I filed the paperwork to have the plot investigated by the county. But it's been 6 months and no one's followed up. The flowers still appear. Every morning, white roses, placed by someone the cameras never see. I stopped watching the footage. I stopped walking row 9C before dawn. Last week, I received a letter addressed to the funeral home. No return address. Inside was a single line, handwritten in blue ink, that matched the ledger. Thank you for keeping her name. I checked the registry again yesterday. Row 9, C14, still shows as empty in the digital file. But in the handwritten ledger, the one that should be permanent, unchanging, there's now a second entry below Evelyn's name. My name. No date yet. The dead don't smile. I'm Jude, and I've been an embalmer for 16 years. I've worked on hundreds of bodies, accident victims, elderly hospice patients, suicides, murders. I've seen every kind of death, every expression a human face can hold in its final moment. Fear, peace, confusion, pain. But never, in all those years, have I seen a smile appear after the fact. Until Mr. Peterman. He came to us on a Thursday. Natural causes, 79 years old, died in his sleep at a nursing home. Peaceful passing, the intake form said. No trauma, no signs of distress. The family wanted a standard viewing. Closed casket initially, but open for a private family hour before the service. My job was preparation, embalming, grooming, dressing, positioning, routine work. I started the process around 9 that evening. Our funeral home is small, family-owned, and I prefer working nights when it's quiet. I set up my instruments, reviewed the paperwork, and began. Mr. Peterman's face was slack, neutral, the way most faces are after death when the muscles finally release. His mouth was slightly open, which is normal. I used a needle injector to close it, set his jaw, arranged his features into a natural resting expression. I took documentation photos at 10:15, we always do, for liability and for reference during final positioning. His face in those photos showed exactly what I'd created, a peaceful, neutral expression, dignified, appropriate. I left him on the table to let the arterial fluid set and went to prepare his clothing in the dressing room down the hall. The family had brought a navy suit, white shirt, burgundy tie. I steamed the jacket, checked the fit. I was gone maybe 40 minutes. When I came back, his face had changed. Not drastically, not obviously, but his mouth, I'd set it in a slight natural closure. Lips together, relaxed. Now there was the faintest upturn at the corners. A subtle expression that looked almost like contentment, like the beginning of a smile. I checked the jaw placement. Still secure. The needle injector was still in place, exactly where I'd set it. The muscles shouldn't have moved, couldn't have moved. Rigor had already passed, and the embalming fluid prevents any further tissue shifting. I adjusted his expression manually, gently pressing the corners of his mouth back to neutral. I took another photo at 11:05, documented the adjustment in my notes. I finished dressing him, positioned him in the casket, arranged his hands. By midnight, he was ready for viewing. I wheeled him into viewing room 2, adjusted the lighting, set the room temperature. Everything looked appropriate. His face was neutral again, peaceful. I locked the room and went to clean my instruments. At 1 in the morning, I walked past viewing room 2 on my way out. I always do a final check, make sure the lighting is right, the temperature stable, the presentation dignified. I opened the door. He was smiling. Not a subtle upturn anymore. A clear, unmistakable smile. Not wide, not grotesque, almost gentle. The kind of smile someone gives when they're genuinely content. His lips were parted slightly, and his expression had a warmth to it that I've never seen in a deceased person. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, staring, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Gas release, I told myself. Post-mortem muscle contractions. Some strange settling of tissue I'd never encountered before. But I've seen gas bloat. I've seen muscle spasms in fresh bodies. This wasn't that. This looked intentional. I approached the casket slowly, my phone already out, taking photos. I checked his jaw again, still secure. I touched his face gently. The skin was cold, firm, exactly as it should be. No warmth, no movement, dead tissue. But the smile remained. I called my supervisor, left a voicemail. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't leave him like that for the family viewing in the morning. I spent 20 minutes adjusting his expression again, using more aggressive techniques, checking and rechecking the muscle structure. When I was done, his face was neutral once more. I took a final photo at 1:43, locked the room, went home. The viewing was scheduled for 10 the next morning. I arrived at 8 to do a final check. When I opened the door to viewing room 2, he was smiling again. The same gentle expression, the same subtle warmth. And next to the casket, on the guest book stand we'd set up for the service, there was a single entry. The guest book shouldn't have been there yet. I'd planned to bring it in at 9:30, but there it was, open to the first page, and someone had signed it. The handwriting was shaky, thin, written in blue ink. I forgive you now. No name, no date, just those 4 words. I checked the security footage. Our system covers the hallways and the entrance, but not the individual viewing room's privacy for families. The hallway camera showed me, locking the room at 1:43. No one else entered. No one else left. The door stayed closed until I opened it at 8. I showed the entry to my supervisor when she arrived. She suggested someone from the family came early, maybe had a key, wanted a private moment. But the family didn't arrive until 10. And when they did, I watched their faces as they approached the guest book. The mother saw the entry first. She went pale, steadied herself against the wall. Her daughter asked what was wrong. The mother didn't answer, just stared at those words. Then she looked at Mr. Peterman in the casket, and something in her expression broke. Later, after the service, after the family left, the daughter stayed behind. She asked to speak with me privately. She told me her father had been estranged from her mother for 40 years, a bitter separation, full of anger and resentment. He'd refused reconciliation, refused contact. They hadn't spoken since 1984. The daughter had tried for years to reunite them before he died, but he wouldn't relent. That's his handwriting, she said, pointing to the guest book. I'd know it anywhere, but he's been dead for 2 days. I didn't know what to say. The daughter closed the guest book, looked at me with tears in her eyes, and said, "Do you think he meant it?" I told her I didn't know, but I've thought about that question every day since. I've thought about his smile, about those words in shaky blue ink. I've thought about the impossibility of it, the violation of everything I know about death and tissue and time. And I've thought about the guest book, which I keep now in a locked drawer in my office. Sometimes, late at night, I take it out and look at that entry. The ink has faded slightly, but the words remain. I forgive you now. I still don't know who he was forgiving, or if he wrote it at all. But the dead don't smile. And yet he did. Some bodies don't want to stay still. My name is Reyes, and I'm an attendant at County Medical Examiner's Office. I've worked the night shift for 8 years. It's quiet work, mostly checking temperatures, logging inventory, making sure the refrigeration units stay functional. The bodies that come through here are waiting for autopsy, for identification, for someone to claim them. My job is just to keep them cold and keep the paperwork straight. Cold Storage 4 has always been trouble. It's the oldest unit, installed back in the 90s. Temperamental as hell. The latch sticks sometimes. The temperature fluctuates. We've had it serviced a dozen times. Every technician says the same thing. It works fine, just old. But there's something about that specific drawer, the third one from the bottom, that's never felt right. It doesn't stay closed. Not every night. Just sometimes. I'll do my rounds, check every drawer, make sure they're secure. All of them stay latched except Cold Storage 4, Drawer 3. I'll come back an hour later, and it's open an inch, sometimes 2, just enough to break the seal, just enough that the temperature alarm goes off. I reported it in October. Maintenance came, tightened the latch, replaced the gasket, worked fine for a week. Then it started again. I started tracking it in my own notebook. What nights it opened, what time, which body was inside. I'm a practical person. I figured there was a pattern, something environmental, air pressure, temperature changes, something. Then we got the unidentified male in November. He came in on a Friday night. Hiker found him in the woods off Highway 12, decomposed pretty badly. No identification. No wallet, no phone, no distinguishing marks, except a small tattoo on his left shoulder to a compass rose. The detective on the case estimated he'd been out there 3, maybe 4 weeks. Cause of death wasn't obvious. Needed full autopsy, but the pathologist was backed up, so the body went into storage. Into Cold Storage 4, Drawer 3. That night, the drawer opened 4 times. I'd close it, hear the latch click, walk away. 20 minutes later, the temperature alarm would sound. I'd come back, and the drawer would be open again. Not just an inch this time, 6 inches, sometimes more, like someone had pulled it from the inside. I checked the body the 3rd time it happened. I'm not supposed to, that's the pathologist's job. But I needed to know if something was shifting, if decomp gases were building pressure, anything that might explain it. I pulled the drawer fully open. The body was zipped in its bag, sealed properly. No movement, no visible swelling. I checked the zipper, fully closed. I pushed the drawer shut, harder this time. Made sure the latch caught. It opened again an hour later. That's when I heard the tapping. I was in the office, doing paperwork, when I heard it faint, rhythmic. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. Coming from the storage room, I walked in slowly, listening. The sound was coming from Cold Storage 4. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps. I stood in front of the unit, my hand on the drawer handle, listening. The tapping stopped. I waited. Nothing. I opened the drawer. The body was still sealed, still in place. But now I could see something I hadn't noticed before. Small scratches on the interior handle of the drawer, the metal lever you'd use to open it from the inside. They hadn't been there earlier. I was sure of it. The metal was scored, thin parallel lines, fresh enough that they caught the light. I closed the drawer, walked back to the office, told myself I was imagining things. The tapping started again at 3 in the morning. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. I didn't open the drawer this time. I just stood there, listening. The pattern continued for maybe 2 minutes. Then it stopped. At 4, I checked the drawer again. It was open. Not just cracked, pulled fully out. Extended as far as the rails would allow. The body bag was still sealed, but now it looked shifted slightly, like something had pushed from the inside. I called my supervisor at 6 as soon as the day shift started. I told her about the latch, the tapping, the scratches. She came down, looked at the drawer, looked at me like I'd been awake too long. She said she'd have maintenance check it again. She didn't mention the scratches. The autopsy happened 3 days later, I wasn't there for it, but I read the report. Cause of death? Exposure and dehydration. Estimated time of death, 3 to 4 weeks before discovery. But there was a note at the bottom, something the pathologist added in handwriting. Unusual bruising on interior surfaces of hands, inconsistent with decomp pattern, unable to determine cause. The body was released to the state after that. No one claimed him. No identification ever made. He was buried in a county plot 2 weeks later. Cold storage 4 still opens sometimes. Not as often. Maybe once a week now. Sometimes less. But it's always drawer 3. Always at night. And sometimes, if I'm there late enough, if the building is quiet enough, I hear it. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. I don't open the drawer anymore when it happens. I just log it in my notebook, mark the time, and go back to my office. I tell myself it's the latch, the old mechanism, something mechanical and explainable. But last week, I worked a double shift, 16 hours straight. I was exhausted, barely awake, and I made a mistake. I went into the storage room around midnight to check the temperatures, and I opened drawer 3 without thinking. It was empty, had been empty for a month. But inside, on the metal surface where a body would rest, there were scratches, dozens of them, thin, parallel lines, scoring the metal in groups of 3. And near the handle, pressed into the frost that had built up on the interior, there was a handprint, small, deliberate. The fingers spread wide, like someone had been pushing. I closed the drawer. I haven't opened it since. The tapping still happens. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, I've stopped logging it. I think something in drawer 3 is still waiting, and I think it knows I can hear it. Some people never leave the places they loved. I'm Al, and I've been a groundskeeper at Maplewood Cemetery for 31 years. I know every tree, every path, every seasonal shift in light through the old oaks that line the southern border. I work the evening maintenance shift, 4 to midnight, when the visitors are gone and the gates are locked. It's peaceful work, quiet. Just me and the dead don't ask for much. The bench by the mausoleum has always been a favorite spot for visitors. It's positioned under a willow tree, facing the older section where the stones date back to the 1800s. People sit there to think, to remember. I've seen countless mourners on that bench over the years, and I've learned not to intrude. Grief needs space, but the old woman was different. I first saw her in early March, just after sunset. I was trimming the hedges near the mausoleum when I noticed her small, elderly, wearing a powder blue cardigan despite the cold. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, staring at the mausoleum entrance. I figured she was a late visitor, maybe hadn't heard the closing announcement. I walked over, respectful, gave her a gentle warning that we'd be locking the gate soon. She didn't respond, didn't even turn to look at me. I assumed she was hard of hearing, so I stepped a bit closer, spoke a little louder. "Ma'am, we're closing in about 10 minutes. Just wanted to make sure you knew." Nothing. She just sat there, perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the mausoleum. I felt awkward. Didn't want to startle her, so I went back to my work. I figured I'd check on her again when I made my final rounds. But when I came back 20 minutes later, she was gone. The bench was empty. The gates were still locked. I checked. No one had left through the main entrance, and the side gates are chained. I walked the perimeter anyway, thinking maybe she'd gone to another section, but I didn't see her anywhere. I shrugged it off. Assumed she'd left while I was distracted, maybe slipped out while I was putting equipment away. But she was there the next night. Same bench, same cardigan, same perfectly still posture, staring at the mausoleum. I approached her again, asked if everything was all right. Again, no response. I got close enough that I could see her profile, deeply lined face, white hair pulled back in a neat bun, thin hands folded together. She looked frail, like a strong wind might carry her away. I tried once more to get her attention. Nothing. I even walked in front of her, directly in her line of sight, and she didn't blink, didn't react, just stared through me, toward the mausoleum. I went to the office and called the police, non-emergency line. Told them I had an elderly woman who seemed unresponsive, might need medical attention. The dispatcher said they'd send someone. I went back to the bench to wait with her. She was gone. The officer arrived 15 minutes later. I explained what happened, showed him the bench, walked him around the area. He took a report, said he'd keep an eye out, suggested she might be a dementia patient wandering from a nearby care facility. He gave me a number to call if I saw her again. I saw her every night that week, always on the same bench, always between 8 and 9 in the evening, always staring at the mausoleum. I stopped approaching her after the third night. It felt wrong somehow, intrusive, like I was interrupting something private. I started timing my rounds to avoid her. I'd work the other sections, stay busy until 9:30, then come back. She was always gone by then. On Friday, I broke my own rule. I walked past the bench at 8:15 and she was there. But this time, I didn't say anything. I just watched from a distance, maybe 30 feet away, partially hidden by a monument. She sat there for exactly 11 minutes. Then she stood slowly, carefully, like her joints hurt, and walked toward the mausoleum. She stopped at the entrance, placed her hand flat against the bronze door, and stood there for a moment. Then she walked away, toward the trees at the edge of the cemetery. I followed her. She moved slowly but steadily, following a path through the older section. I kept my distance, staying in the shadows. She walked with purpose, like she knew exactly where she was going. She stopped at a small marker near the willow tree, knelt down. I heard her knees crack even from where I stood, and touched the stone gently. I waited until she stood and walked away. Then I went to see which grave she'd visited. The marker was simple: Margaret Ann Thorne, beloved mother, 1927 to 2017. Below that, together again. I didn't think much of it at the time. Lots of people visit graves of loved ones. But something nagged at me. I went back to the office and checked our records. Margaret Thorne was interred in the mausoleum, Crypt 14B, not in the ground. So whose grave had the old woman been visiting? I checked the records more carefully. The marker she'd touched belonged to a different Margaret Louise Hayes, no relation to Thorne, died in 1998. I was confused, but I let it go. Maybe the old woman had been confused too, visiting the wrong grave in the fading light. I didn't see her the following week. The bench stayed empty. I assumed she'd stopped coming, maybe moved away, maybe ended up in a care facility. Then, 2 weeks later, I was cleaning the mausoleum interior. We do that monthly. Dust the crypts, polish the brass nameplates. I was working through the rows when I stopped at Crypt 14B, Margaret Ann Thorne. The name matched the grave marker the old woman had visited, but there was a photo on the crypt, a small porcelain oval set into the bronze. I'd never really looked at it before. It was her, the old woman. The same face, the same white hair. Younger in the photo, maybe 70, but unmistakably her. I stood there for a long time, staring at that photo, trying to make sense of it. I checked the dates again. Margaret Thorne had died in 2017, 8 years ago. I'd been seeing her, or someone who looked exactly like her, for 2 weeks. I went back to the office and pulled the full file. Margaret Thorne had been a widow, no children. Her husband had died in 1999 and was buried in the older section. I checked the plot number. The marker near the willow tree, the one she'd been visiting, not Margaret Louise Hayes. I'd read it wrong in the dark. The marker was for Harold Thorne, her husband. I pulled out my phone and called the daughter listed as the contact for the crypt. The number was disconnected. I found an obituary online instead. It listed a daughter, Sarah Thorne, living in Oregon. I tracked down her current number and called her that evening. I told her I'd seen someone visiting the mausoleum who looked like the photo on her mother's crypt. I asked if maybe her mother had a sister, someone who might be coming to pay respects. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My mother didn't have any siblings, and she's been dead 8 years." I told her I understood, that I was probably mistaken. She asked me to describe the woman I'd seen. I did: the blue cardigan, the white hair, the way she sat perfectly still. Sarah started crying. "That's what she wore," she said. "That cardigan. She wore it every day the last year of her life. She hated being in that mausoleum. She wanted to be buried next to my father, but she'd prepaid for the crypt decades ago, and we couldn't afford to change it. She told me, right before she died, that she was afraid of being alone." I didn't know what to say. Sarah asked me if I'd seen her recently. I told her it had been 2 weeks. "That's when I visited," she said. "I came for the anniversary of her death. I sat on that bench for a while, and I told her I was sorry. Sorry we didn't bury her next to Dad. Sorry she was alone." We ended the call quietly. I haven't seen the old woman since. The bench stays empty now, but sometimes, early in the evening, I walk past the mausoleum and I stop. I look at Crypt 14B, and I think about Margaret Thorne, alone behind bronze and concrete, and I think about the bench under the willow tree, and I wonder if saying sorry was enough, or if she's still sitting there, on nights when I'm not looking, waiting to go home. Some graves remember what we forget. My name is Director Singh, and I've been running Hillcrest Memorial Gardens for 19 years. It's a small operation, 200 acres, about 6,000 occupied plots, family-owned since the 1920s. We pride ourselves on record keeping. Every burial is logged, every plot accounted for, every stone mapped in our database. I know this cemetery better than I know my own neighborhood, which is why I couldn't explain the headstone in plot 1847. It appeared on a Wednesday in April. I was walking the northeast section during my morning rounds when I saw it: a granite marker, simple rectangular design, partially obscured by overgrown grass. I stopped. I knew this section. I'd walked it 100 times. Plot 1847 had been empty for 15 years, reserved but never used. No stone, no burial, just an open plot, waiting for a family that never came back. But there it was. The stone was weathered, the edges softened by years of rain and wind. Lichen grew in the carved letters. It looked old, decades old, at least. The inscription was simple: Sarah Catherine Brennan, 1951 to 1973, gone but not forgotten. I stood there, staring at it, trying to understand. The stone couldn't be new. The weathering was too extensive, too natural. But it couldn't be old either. I'd walked past this plot 2 days ago. It had been empty. I took photos, pulled out my phone, checked our digital records. Plot 1847, purchased 1971 by William Brennan, reserved. Status: unoccupied. I went back to the office and pulled the physical files. The paperwork matched the digital records: plot purchased, never used. No burial permit, no death certificate, no interment authorization. Just a receipt for the plot purchase and a brief note: reserved for family use. I called the number on file: disconnected. I searched the name in our historical records, county databases, obituary archives. Nothing. No William Brennan in our system, beyond the purchase receipt. No Sarah Catherine Brennan anywhere. But the stone was real. I touched it that afternoon, ran my fingers over the carved letters. Solid granite, cold and weathered. Real. I checked the county assessor's records. There was a Sarah Brennan listed as missing in 1973. 22 years old. Last seen leaving work at a diner on Route 19. Never found. Case went cold. The dates matched the stone. I called the police department, asked to speak to someone about old missing persons cases. The detective I talked to sounded skeptical, but agreed to send someone out. Officer Mendoza arrived that afternoon, looked at the stone, took photos, ran the name through their database. "We have a file on Sarah Brennan," she said. "Missing person 73. But there was never a body. Never a confirmed death. No one to issue a death certificate. So, how is there a headstone? I asked. She didn't have an answer. We decided to check the plot. She called for a ground-penetrating radar unit. Brought it out the next day. The tech ran it over plot 1847, studying the readout. Frowning. There's something down there, he said. About 6 feet. Looks like could be a casket, or just a void in the soil. Hard to say without excavating. Officer Mendoza got a warrant. We brought in a crew, cordoned off the area, started digging. We found the casket at 6 feet, just like the text said. Old, deteriorated, barely holding together. The crew lifted it carefully, set it on a tarp. The wood crumbled when they opened it. Inside was a body, decomposed, but partially preserved by the casket seal. Female, young. Dental records would be needed for positive identification, but the detective seemed confident. This is her, Mendoza said quietly. This is Sarah Brennan. She looked at me. Who authorized this burial? I showed her the records. Nothing. No permit, no paperwork, no authorization. According to every official document, this plot was empty. Someone buried her here, Mendoza said. 50 years ago. Completely off the books. The investigation took 3 weeks. Dental records confirmed it was Sarah Brennan. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the skull. Homicide. The case was reopened. They started looking into family members, associates, anyone connected to her disappearance. And that's when I found the second anomaly. I was reviewing our records more carefully, cross-referencing the physical logs with the digital files, when I noticed something strange. There were other plots, like 1847 purchased in the 70s, marked as unoccupied, but with small discrepancies in the logs. Notes that didn't quite match, dates that seemed off. I started checking them physically. 3 more stones. All weathered, all old, all marking graves that shouldn't exist. The police excavated those too. 3 more bodies. All women, all young, all matching missing persons cases from the 70s. The investigation is still ongoing. They think it might be a serial case. Someone who worked at the cemetery back then, had access to records, could falsify or hide burials. They're looking through old employee files, interviewing anyone still alive who worked here in the 70s. But here's what bothers me. I've been checking our records obsessively since we found the bodies. Every plot, every file, every discrepancy. And 3 days ago, I found something in the digital system that wasn't there before. Plot 1847. Status: occupied. Date of burial: April 10th, 2025. Last week, but we didn't change the records. The police didn't update anything. The system just updated itself. And when I checked the burial registry, the physical one, the handwritten log we've kept since the 20s there, was an entry for Sarah Brennan. Date of burial, April 10th, 2025. The handwriting looked old, faded, like it had been there for decades. But I'd checked that page a week ago. It had been blank. I went back to the plot yesterday. The stone is still there, still weathered, still real. But now there are flowers, fresh ones, white lilies, laid at the base. I checked the security footage. No one entered the cemetery after hours. No one visited that section during the day. I picked up the flowers. There was a card, handwritten, "Thank you. I don't know who left it. I don't know what they're thanking me for. But I think about Sarah Brennan, buried in secret 50 years ago, hidden and forgotten. I think about how she was finally found, finally identified, finally acknowledged. And I think about that headstone, appearing out of nowhere, like someone wanted her remembered. The detective asked me last week if I believed in ghosts. I told her I didn't know, but I keep the card from the flowers in my desk drawer. I look at it sometimes, at that simple "thank you" in handwriting I don't recognize. And I wonder if Sarah Brennan somehow made that stone appear. If she'd been waiting all these years for someone to see her. If she's finally at peace. Or if there are others still buried here, still waiting, in plots that show as empty. I walk the cemetery differently now. I look at the empty spaces between the markers. I check the records more carefully, looking for discrepancies, for signs. Last night, I found another one. Plot 2214. Purchased 1978. Unoccupied, but when I walked past it this morning, there was something in the grass. A slight depression. Rectangular, like the earth had settled. I'm going back tomorrow with the radar unit. I think we're going to find another one. And I think more stones are going to appear. Some distances are longer than the map suggests. I'm Marcus, and I've been driving for Riverside Memorial Transport for 12 years. It's straightforward work: pick up bodies from hospitals, nursing homes, private residences, and bring them to funeral homes or the medical examiner. I drive a van, climate-controlled, respectful. Most of the time, it's quiet. The dead are easy passengers. Most of the time. The call came in at 9:30 on a Thursday night. Pickup from Mercy General. Delivery to Hartwell Funeral Home, about 90 miles north. Standard long-distance transport. Elderly male, natural causes, family requested transfer to their hometown for services. I got the paperwork, loaded the gurney, secured the body bag, and started driving. The first hour was normal. Highway driving, light traffic, clear night. I had the radio on low talk radio. Something about local politics. The body was secure in the back. The climate control set to appropriate temperature. Everything by the book. Then I heard the zipper. It was faint at first. Just a soft metallic sound, like something shifting. I turned down the radio, listened. Nothing. I checked the rearview mirror. The cargo area was dark. Just the faint green glow of the temperature gauge. The sound came again. Unmistakable this time. The slow, deliberate sound of a zipper opening. I pulled over immediately, put on my hazards, got out, and opened the back doors. The body bag was sealed. Zipper fully closed. Pull tab at the top where I'd left it. I checked it carefully. Tested the zipper mechanism. It was fine. Secure. I told myself I'd imagined it. Fatigue, maybe. The sound of the tires on the highway. Misheard. I got back in the van and kept driving. 20 minutes later, I heard it again. This time I didn't pull over. I just turned on the interior cargo light and looked in the rearview mirror. The body bag was still sealed, still secure, but something looked different. The shape inside had changed. When I'd loaded the body, the deceased had been positioned the way we always do. Supine, arms crossed over the chest, hands resting flat. Standard positioning. But now, looking at the bag in the mirror, the shape looked wrong. The arms seemed higher, positioned differently. I pulled over again. This time I opened the bag. I had to. Procedure says, if there's any concern about positioning or security, you check. I unzipped it carefully, just enough to see inside. The deceased was an elderly man, maybe 80, thin and pale. His face was peaceful, slack, but his hands weren't crossed anymore. They were flat against the inside of the bag, palms pressing outward, fingers slightly spread, like he was pushing. I repositioned the arms, crossed them back over his chest, zipped the bag, and secured it again. I checked the gurney straps. Everything was tight. Everything was secure. I drove faster after that. I wanted this delivery done. The highway stretched long and empty. No other cars, no lights except my headlights cutting through the dark. The radio started to crackle with static. I switched stations. More static. I turned it off. That's when I heard the breathing. Slow, steady breaths. Coming from the back of the van. I knew it was impossible. I knew the body in the bag was dead. Had been dead for hours before I picked it up. But I heard it. Clear and unmistakable. In, out. In, out. I pulled over again. I sat there for a full minute, hands on the wheel, listening. The breathing continued. Steady, calm. I got out, opened the back doors, and unzipped the bag again. The man's face was the same. Slack, peaceful, dead. But his hands had moved again, not just repositioned, changed entirely. His arms were no longer crossed. They were extended, reaching upward. And his hands were now pressed flat against the inside of the bag, right where the zipper would be, like he'd been trying to open it. And his fingernails, were bent backward slightly, like he'd been clawing. I stood there, staring, trying to rationalize it. Post-mortem muscle contraction, gas release, something physiological and explainable. But his hands had been crossed. I'd positioned them myself. Twice. I zipped the bag shut, got back in the van, and drove. I didn't stop again. I didn't check the mirror. I just focused on the road, on the miles ticking down, on getting to Hartwell as fast as I could. The breathing continued for the next 40 minutes. In, out, in, out. Steady and rhythmic, like someone sleeping. When I finally pulled into Hartwell's lot, the breathing stopped. I sat in the van for a moment, steadying myself, then got out and opened the back doors. The body bag was sealed. The gurney was secure. Everything looked normal. I wheeled the body inside, helped the funeral director transfer it to their prep room. He asked if the transport went smoothly. I said yes. I didn't tell him about the zipper, the breathing, the hands. What would I say? That a dead man tried to open his body bag from the inside? That I heard him breathing for 40 miles? I went home and tried to sleep. I couldn't. I kept thinking about those hands pressed flat against the bag, about the way the fingers were spread, like he was pushing. The next day, I called Hartwell, asked if everything went okay with the prep. The director said it was fine. Standard process. No issues. I asked casually if he'd noticed anything unusual about the body. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Actually, yeah. His hands, the positioning was strange when we unwrapped him, like he'd been reaching for something. We had to reposition them for the viewing." I thanked him and hung up. I've done dozens of transports since then. Hundreds, probably. Most of them are routine, quiet, uneventful. But I still think about that drive, about the sound of the zipper, the steady breathing, the hands pressed against the bag. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving an empty highway with a body in the back, I check the rearview mirror just to make sure the bag is still sealed, just to make sure the shape inside hasn't changed. Because I know what I heard, I know what I saw, and I know that dead bodies don't breathe. But sometimes, on long drives, when the highway is empty and the night is dark, I hear it again. In, out, in, out. And I drive faster. Some flowers bloom in impossible gardens. I'm Elena, and I've been a caretaker at Whitewood Cemetery for 14 years. I handle the grounds, the maintenance, the small details that keep the place respectful. Trim the hedges, replace broken vases, clear away dead flowers. It's meditative work. Most families appreciate it. They come to visit and find their loved ones' graves tended, cared for. The child's grave in Section 7 has always bothered me. It's a small marker, simple granite, for a girl named Emma Rose Calloway, born 1959, died 1965, 6 years old. The inscription reads, "Our little angel." There's a carved lamb at the top of the stone, worn smooth by decades of weather. The grave itself is unremarkable. What bothers me are the flowers. Every morning for the past 3 months, there's a fresh wreath of white lilies on Emma's grave. Not placed randomly, positioned carefully at the base of the marker, perfectly centered. The flowers are always pristine. No wilting, no brown edges. Fresh cut, like they were placed within the hour. The cemetery is locked from dusk until dawn. The gates are chained, the perimeter fenced. We have security cameras at the main entrance and the maintenance shed, but not throughout the ground's budget limitations. No one should be able to enter after hours. But every morning, the lilies are there. I asked around, checked with the office, looked through our visitor logs. No one named Calloway had signed in recently. No one had requested special access to that section. I asked the other caretakers if they'd seen anyone visiting Emma's grave. No one had. I started documenting it, taking photos each morning, the flowers, the placement, the timestamp. I compared them. The wreaths were identical. Same size, same arrangement, same white lilies. Not just similar, identical, like they came from the same florist, ordered the same way every time. I called every florist within 20 miles. None of them had orders for white lily wreaths. None of them recognized the arrangement style. One florist, an older woman who'd been in business for 40 years, looked at my photo and frowned. "Those are Lilium candidum," she said. "Madonna lilies. They're not common anymore. Hard to grow, hard to source. And the variety in your photo, that specific cultivar, hasn't been commercially available since the 60s. I thanked her and left. That night, I stayed late. I wanted to see who was placing the flowers. I parked my truck outside the cemetery, walked in through the maintenance gate after we closed, and positioned myself near Section 7. I brought a thermos of coffee, a flashlight, and my phone. I settled in behind a large oak tree, with a clear view of Emma's grave. The hours passed slowly. 8 o'clock, 9, 10. The cemetery was dark, quiet, except for the wind moving through the trees. I kept my eyes on the marker, watching for any movement, any sign of someone approaching. At midnight, I heard singing, faint, distant, like it was coming from far away. A woman's voice singing a lullaby. I couldn't make out the words, but the melody was soft, gentle, the kind of song you'd sing to a child at bedtime. I stood up slowly, trying to locate the source. The singing seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, drifting through the air like fog. Then I saw her. A woman, standing at Emma's grave. I don't know how she got there. I'd been watching, hadn't seen anyone approach. But there she was, kneeling by the marker, placing the wreath of white lilies. I turned on my flashlight, called out, "Excuse me, the cemetery is closed." She didn't respond, didn't turn, just kept arranging the flowers, adjusting their position. I walked closer, my flashlight beam fixed on her. "Ma'am, you can't be here after hours." She stood up slowly, and that's when I realized something was wrong. She was translucent, not invisible, not quite, just not entirely solid. I could see through her, see the grave marker behind her, the trees beyond. She wore a dress from another era, pale blue, with a high collar and long sleeves. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a style from the 60s. She turned toward me, and I saw her face. Young, maybe 30. Sad eyes. She looked at me for a long moment, and I felt cold, not just from the night air, but a deep, penetrating cold that went to my bones. Then she spoke. "I can't leave her alone." Her voice was soft, distant, like it was carried on wind from far away. I tried to respond, but my voice caught. I just stood there, frozen, my flashlight shaking in my hand. She turned back to the grave, knelt down again, and touched the marker gently. The flowers seemed to brighten, the petals almost glowing in the darkness. "I promised I'd always bring her flowers," she said. "I promised I'd never forget." And then she was gone. Not faded, not walked away, just gone. One moment there, the next moment empty air. I stood there for a long time, staring at the grave, at the wreath of white lilies. I walked closer, touched the flowers. They were real, solid, fresh. I went back to the office the next morning and pulled Emma Calloway's file. It was thin, just a death certificate and the plot purchase receipt. Emma had died in 1965. Cause of death, drowning. Her mother was listed as Margaret Rose Calloway. I searched for Margaret's records, found her death certificate. She died in 1968, 3 years after Emma. Cause of death, suicide. She was buried in a different cemetery across town. Not with her daughter. I found the funeral director who'd handled Emma's service, retired now, but still living locally. I called him, asked if he remembered the Calloway family. He did. "Tragic case," he said. "The mother was devastated, blamed herself for the drowning Emma had been playing near a pond while Margaret was distracted. After the funeral, Margaret came to the cemetery every single day, brought fresh flowers, white lilies, said they were Emma's favorite. "What happened to her?" I asked. "She couldn't cope," he said quietly. "Took her own life 3 years later. The family had a falling out over it, religious issues. They buried her in a different cemetery, separate from Emma. Margaret had wanted to be buried with her daughter, but the family wouldn't allow it." I thanked him and hung up. I haven't stayed late at the cemetery since that night, but every morning the white lilies are there, fresh, perfect, placed with care. The security footage from the main gate shows nothing. No one enters, no one leaves, but the flowers keep appearing. Last week, I brought my own flowers to Emma's grave, a small bouquet of daisies, placed beside the lilies. I don't know why. It felt right. The next morning my daisies were still there, but next to them, arranged carefully, was a small sprig of forget-me-nots. I hadn't brought those. I checked with the other caretakers. No one else had visited that grave, but I think I know who left them. And I think Margaret is still keeping her promise. Every morning, when I see those white lilies, I say a quiet thank you, not to anyone specific, just to the air, to the space where I saw her standing. I don't know if she hears me, but the flowers keep coming, and I think maybe that's enough. Some doors open to places we can't see. I'm Yoon, and I've been an assistant at Stanton Funeral Home for 7 years. I handle setup, coordinate services, help families during viewings. It's demanding work, emotional work, but I find meaning in it. Helping people say goodbye matters. Viewing room 3 has always been cold. Not uncomfortable cold, just a persistent chill that never quite goes away. Even in summer when the rest of the building is warm. We've had the HVAC checked multiple times. The technicians say it's fine. Circulation is normal. Temperature control is working properly. But room 3 stays cold. The door is the real problem. It opens on its own. Not dramatically, no slamming, no sudden movements. Just a slow, deliberate swing, like someone is gently pushing it from the inside. It happens at night, always at 3:17 in the morning. I know the time because the alarm system logs it. Every time the door opens, it triggers the motion sensor and the system records it. 3:17 a.m. every single time. It started 6 months ago. The first night it happened, I was working late, finishing paperwork in the office. The alarm chimed just a soft alert, indicating motion in room 3. I checked the monitor. The door was open. I walked down the hallway, looked inside. Empty. No one there. I closed the door, made sure the latch caught, went back to my work. 20 minutes later, the alarm chimed again. The door was open. I checked it more carefully this time. The latch was functioning properly. The hinges were tight. There was no draft, no air pressure issue that might push it open. I closed it again, tested the lock. Solid. It opened again at 3:17 the next morning. I started documenting it. Every night, 3:17. The door would open, the alarm would log it, and I'd close it again. I mentioned it to Mr. Stanton, the owner. He was skeptical, but agreed to have a contractor look at it. The contractor found nothing wrong. He replaced the latch anyway, installed a new strike plate, adjusted the hinges, said it should stay closed now. It opened again that night, 3:17 a.m. I decided to stay and watch. I positioned myself in the hallway outside room 3. At 3 in the morning, coffee in hand, eyes on the door. I wanted to see it happen, understand what was causing it. At 3:16, the temperature dropped. Not just in room 3, the entire hallway went cold. I could see my breath. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. At 3:17, the door swung open, slowly, smoothly, like someone was guiding it. I stood up, walked closer, looked inside. The room was empty. The viewing pedestal where we place caskets stood bare. The chairs arranged for family were undisturbed. Nothing moved. But I felt something. A presence. Not threatening exactly. Just there. Watching. Waiting. I closed the door and went back to the office. I pulled the building's history from our records. Stanton Funeral Home has been in operation since 1948. Originally owned by Samuel Stanton, Mr. Stanton's grandfather. I started searching through old newspapers, local archives, looking for anything connected to the building. It took hours, but I found it. An obituary from 1963. Henry Wallace, age 47, funeral director. Collapsed during a service at Stanton Funeral Home and died of a heart attack. Time of death, 3:17 p.m. The service had been held in room 3. I showed the article to Mr. Stanton. He went pale. I remember my grandfather mentioning that, he said quietly. Henry was his business partner. It destroyed my grandfather. He never really talked about it. Did they ever find out why he collapsed? I asked. Mr. Stanton shook his head. Heart attack, they said. Sudden. No warning. He was in the middle of speaking to a family when he just fell. They tried to revive him, but he was gone in minutes. I asked where in room 3 it had happened. Mr. Stanton thought for a moment, then walked me down the hallway. He stood in the doorway, looking at the room, and pointed to the far corner, near where we store the flower stands. There, he said, that's where he fell. My grandfather had the carpet replaced afterward, couldn't stand seeing the spot, but it happened right there. That night, I stayed again. At 3:17, when the door opened, I walked into room 3. I stood in the corner where Henry Wallace had collapsed, and I waited. The temperature dropped even further. My breath came out in white puffs. I felt the presence again, stronger this time, right behind me, close enough that I should have heard breathing. I turned, nothing, but when I looked back toward the doorway, I saw something that made my hands go cold. A figure, standing in the shadows just outside the room, tall, wearing a dark suit, hands at his sides. He was translucent, barely visible, but there, he was watching me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just stood there, frozen, as the figure stepped closer to the doorway. He didn't enter the room, just stood at the threshold, looking in. Then he raised one hand, slowly, and pointed toward the corner where I was standing, the corner where he died. I understood, somehow, what he was trying to tell me. He couldn't leave. He was tied to this room, to the moment of his death, trapped in the 3:17 of his final heartbeat. I whispered, I'm sorry. The figure lowered his hand. The temperature began to rise, and then he was gone. The door stayed closed that night, but it opened again the next night, at 3:17. I've stopped trying to fix it. Mr. Stanton has stopped asking about it. We just accept it now. Room 3's door opens every night at 3:17, and we close it again. But I never go into that room at night anymore, because sometimes, when I walk past it during the day, when we're setting up for services or cleaning after viewings, I feel it again. That presence, standing in the corner, watching, and visitors, family members who come for viewings, sometimes mention it. They say the room feels crowded, like there's someone else there, someone they can't quite see. I don't tell them about Henry Wallace. I don't tell them what I saw, but I know he's there, still working, still watching over the room where he died, still opening that door every night. At the exact moment his heart stopped, and I wonder if he's waiting for something, waiting for someone, or if he's just trying to leave and can't. Some secrets stay buried until someone digs too deep. I'm Tom, and I've been a cemetery excavator for 22 years. Digging graves is honest work, hard on the body, but straightforward. You dig where you're told. You're careful, and you show respect. The dead don't care who digs their hole, but their families do. Last month, we got a contract to install new utility lines through the old section of Oakmont Cemetery. The section dates back to the 1860s, barely maintained, most of the families long gone. The cemetery board wanted to run electrical for new lighting, modernize the infrastructure. My crew started digging on a Monday morning. The trenching was routine. We had the plots mapped, knew where the occupied graves were, planned our lines to avoid them, but soil that old shifts. Records from the 1800s aren't always accurate. We were prepared to find anomalies. We found one on day 3. We were digging about 6 feet down, following the planned route, when the backhoe hit something solid. I stopped immediately, had the operator back off. We get hits, sometimes rocks, old tree roots, pieces of forgotten infrastructure. I jumped down into the trench to check it. It was wood, rotted, old, but unmistakably a coffin. We weren't supposed to be near any graves. I checked the survey map. We were a good 10 feet from the nearest marked plot. But there it was, a casket, buried directly beneath another grave, completely unrecorded. I called the cemetery office. They sent out the director and a county inspector. We carefully excavated around the casket, revealed the full structure. It was old construction style from the 1800s. Handmade, partially collapsed. No marker above it, no record of its existence. The inspector decided we needed to open it for identification. We had to know who was buried there, see if there were any relatives to notify. I didn't love the idea, but I understood. We couldn't just cover it back up and pretend we hadn't found it. We lifted the casket out carefully, set it on a tarp. The wood was fragile, crumbling at the edges. The lid came apart when we tried to open it. Inside was nothing but bones and a piece of paper. The skeleton was intact, positioned normally. Female, based on the bone structure the inspector could tell, even without a forensic anthropologist. But it was the paper that made us all go quiet. It was folded once, tucked beside the ribcage, protected inside a glass jar that had somehow stayed sealed. The inspector put on gloves, carefully removed the jar, opened it. The paper inside was yellowed but legible, handwritten in ink that had faded to brown. It read, "She's still looking." That was it. 3 words. No name, no date, no explanation. The inspector photographed it, bagged it as evidence. We covered the casket temporarily and called in the police and a forensic team. If this was an unmarked grave, it might be connected to a crime, might be a burial someone wanted hidden. The investigation took 2 weeks. The forensic team dated the remains to the 1860s or 70s, consistent with the casket construction. They couldn't identify who she was, no dental records from that era, no DNA matches in any database. She was a Jane Doe from a century and a half ago. But the note bothered me. She's still looking. Looking for what? For whom? I went back to the cemetery on my own time, walked through the old section. I looked at the graves near where we'd found the casket. Most of the markers were weathered, names barely legible. I started taking photos, documenting the inscriptions, cross-referencing them with whatever cemetery records I could find. One marker stood out, about 15 feet from where we'd found the hidden grave. The stone was broken, tilted, but I could still read the inscription. Margaret Shaw, beloved daughter, 1842 to 1867. Below that, in smaller letters, lost but never forgotten. I looked up the name, found a newspaper article from 1867. Margaret Shaw had disappeared from her home, never found. Her family had buried an empty casket in her honor, held a funeral service, paid for a marker, but she'd never been found. I went back to the hidden grave. The position didn't quite line up. It was offset, buried beneath a different family's plot. But the timing matched. 1860s, a young woman disappeared. I showed my findings to the police. They reopened the historical missing persons case, started comparing details. The forensic team ran tests, tried to find any records of Margaret Shaw's medical or physical description. They couldn't confirm it was her, not without DNA comparison, and there were no living relatives. But the circumstantial evidence was strong. Someone had buried a woman in secret, beneath another grave. and left a note. She's still looking. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Looking for what? Her family? Her home? The person who killed her? The investigation stalled. The remains were transferred to a county facility for storage, pending further identification. The gravesite was filled in. We rerouted the utility line. But I've been back to that section a dozen times since then, because I hear things now when I'm there. Whispers, faint like wind through grass. But they're not random. They're words, spoken soft and low. I can't make them out most of the time. But once, standing near Margaret Shaw's marker at dusk, I heard it clearly. Find me. 2 words. A woman's voice. I turned, looked around. No one there. Just me and the gravestones and the setting Sunday. I haven't told anyone. They'd think I was losing it. Maybe I am. But I've started researching. Looking through old records, newspaper archives, historical society documents. Trying to find out what happened to Margaret Shaw. Who she was. How she disappeared. Where she actually died. I don't know why it matters. She's been dead for over 150 years. Her family is long gone. There's no one left to care. But I care, because I found her. And I think she's been waiting all this time for someone to hear her. She's still looking. I think the note wasn't about Margaret. I think it was about whoever buried her. I think someone murdered Margaret Shaw, buried her in secret, and left a note as a warning. That the person who killed her, the she in the note, was still looking, still watching, still hiding something. I've been digging into local history from that era. There was another woman who disappeared around the same time, Emily Marsh. 1838 to unknown. She was reported missing in 1868, a year after Margaret. Her grave marker is in the same section, 2 rows over from Margaret's. I'm going back tomorrow with ground-penetrating radar. I think we're going to find another hidden casket and another note, and I think I'm going to keep finding them until I understand what she's still looking really means, or until she finds me first. Some voices speak when words are impossible. I'm Wei, and I've been an embalmer for 11 years. I work at Chen and Associates, a small funeral home that serves the Asian American community primarily, though we handle all families who come to us. Embalming is intimate work. You're alone with the deceased, restoring what death has taken, preparing them for their final viewing. It requires focus, respect, and a certain detachment. You can't let emotion interfere with the work, but some bodies stay with you. Mrs. Eleanor Park came to us on a Saturday in February. 73 years old, died alone in her apartment. Natural causes heart failure, the coroner said. She'd been found by a neighbor after 3 days. She had no family, no emergency contacts. The county paid for a basic service cremation, no viewing planned. My job was just preparation and documentation before the cremation. I started the process around 8 that evening. Our facility is quiet at night, just me and the prep room and the soft hum of the ventilation system. I laid out my instruments, reviewed the intake form. Eleanor Park. No next of kin. No visitors expected. A life that ended quietly. Alone. I began the standard procedure: washing, setting features, checking for any injuries or marks that needed documentation. Her face was peaceful, unremarkable, thin, elderly, the kind of face that held a lifetime of small joys and small sorrows. I closed her eyes, positioned her jaw, started the arterial preparation. That's when I heard the humming, soft, barely audible. A melody I didn't recognize, simple, repetitive, the kind of tune that might be a lullaby. I stopped working, listened. The sound was definitely there, coming from somewhere in the prep room. I checked the ventilation system. Sometimes the ducts carry sound from other parts of the building, but the system was quiet. I checked my phone. Maybe I'd accidentally triggered something. It was silent, sitting on the counter where I'd left it. The humming continued. I went back to work, telling myself It was just building acoustics. Something from outside, maybe a radio in a nearby business. But the melody was so clear, so close, and familiar somehow, though I couldn't place it. I worked for another 30 minutes, finishing the arterial embalming, beginning the cavity treatment. The humming faded in and out, sometimes loud enough that I could almost make out words, sometimes barely present. I took a break around 9:30, stepped outside the prep room to clear my head. The humming stopped immediately. I walked back in. It started again. This time, I paid attention to the source. It was coming from Mrs. Park, not from near her, not from the table, from her, from the body I was working on. I stood very still, staring at her face. Her lips were closed, positioned exactly as I'd set them. Her jaw was secured. Her chest wasn't moving, no breath, no life. She was dead. Completely, unambiguously dead. But the humming continued, and it was coming from her. I stepped closer, leaned in. The sound was definitely emanating from her body, from somewhere in her throat or chest. A soft, melodic hum, steady and rhythmic. I checked her airway. Sometimes gas can cause sound pressure releasing through the vocal cords, but this wasn't gas. This was structured, musical, a tune. I stepped back, pulled out my phone and started recording. I needed documentation, proof that I wasn't imagining this. The humming continued for exactly 4 minutes. I watched the timer on my phone, listened to the melody repeat, then it stopped. Just ended mid-phrase, like someone had been interrupted. I played back the recording. The humming was there, clear and unmistakable. The same tune, the same rhythm. I finished the preparation work quickly after that, documented everything, and moved Mrs. Park to cold storage. I didn't mention the humming to anyone. What would I say? That a dead woman was humming during her embalming? But I couldn't let it go. I went back the next day, checked the security footage from the prep room. We have cameras for liability. They record the prep room from a fixed angle, showing the table and the embalmer. The footage isn't audio, just visual. But it would show if I'd been alone, if there was any explanation for the sound. I watched the footage from the previous night, watched myself working, moving around the table, watched Mrs. Park lying perfectly still. And then, at the 4-minute mark when the humming had been loudest, I saw it. Her lips moved. Not a lot, just a slight, barely perceptible movement. But they moved. For exactly 4 minutes, in time with the humming I'd heard, her lips shifted. Open, closed, like she was singing. I sat there staring at the monitor, watching it over and over. The footage didn't lie. Her lips had moved. During those 4 minutes, Eleanor Park, who had been dead for days, who I had personally embalmed, had moved her lips in perfect sync with the melody I'd heard. I pulled her file again, looked for any family information, any contacts. Nothing. The county had handled everything. But there was a name listed under person who reported death. A neighbor, Susan Chen. I found her number in the police report. I called her that afternoon. I didn't explain who I was, just said I was following up on Eleanor Park's arrangements and had some questions. Susan was happy to talk. She'd known Eleanor for 20 years, checked on her regularly, brought her groceries. She was so lonely at the end, Susan said. No family left. Her husband died 30 years ago. Her daughter died in childbirth in the 80s. She never really recovered from that. Did she have any grandchildren? I asked. One, Susan said. A granddaughter. But she died too. SIDS, I think. Eleanor never talked about it much, but I know she kept a photo of the baby on her nightstand. I asked if Eleanor had any particular habits, any songs she liked. Susan was quiet for a moment. She used to hum all the time, this one little tune, over and over. She said it was a lullaby her mother sang to her. She'd sung it to her daughter, and then to her granddaughter before she died. My hands went cold. Do you remember how it went? Susan hummed a few bars. It was the same melody I'd heard in the prep room. I thanked her and hung up. I went back to the facility that night, pulled up the security footage again. I watched those 4 minutes over and over. Mrs. Park's lips moving, silent on the camera, but I knew what sound they'd been making. She'd been singing the lullaby she'd sung to her daughter and granddaughter, singing it one last time. I checked the cremation schedule. She was scheduled for Monday morning, 2 days away. I made a decision. I went to a store that evening, bought a small stuffed lamb, soft, white, the kind you'd give to a baby. I brought it back to the facility, went to cold storage, and placed it in Mrs. Park's hands. I don't know why. It felt right. Like she shouldn't go alone. Like she should have something to hold. The cremation happened Monday morning. I wasn't there for it. I had other work to do. But that afternoon, I checked the security footage from cold storage. The night before the cremation, at 2:30 in the morning, the camera recorded something, movement. Just a slight shift in Mrs. Park's hands, drawing the lamb closer, like she was holding it. The camera didn't have audio, but I think she was humming. I think she was singing her lullaby one last time, to a granddaughter who died 40 years ago, with the lamb I'd given her held close. I've never told anyone about this. I've never shown anyone the footage. But I kept the recording on my phone. Sometimes, late at night, I listen to it. 4 minutes of soft, melodic humming, a lullaby sung by a dead woman to children long gone. And I think about Eleanor Park, alone for so long, finally at peace. I think she was saying goodbye. And I think, maybe, someone was listening. Some apologies arrived too late, or exactly on time. I'm Director Ortiz, and I've managed Hillside Memorial for 17 years. Cemetery management is about routine, consistency, and respect. You maintain the grounds, support grieving families, and ensure every plot is tended with dignity. But some graves demand more attention than others. Some graves refuse to follow the rules. Michael Brennan's grave is one of those. He was buried in Section 4 last October. 41 years old, sudden heart attack. He left behind a wife, 2 teenage daughters, and what seemed like half the town at his funeral. Well-loved man, good father, good husband. The service was standing room only. His widow, Patricia, requested a specific plot under the old maple tree, where the afternoon light filters through the leaves. We accommodated. She chose a simple granite marker with his name, dates, and an inscription, "Forever in our hearts." The problems started 3 weeks after the burial. My groundskeeper, Ramon, found the grave covered in flowers one morning. Not placed flowers, growing flowers. Night-blooming jasmine, dozens of blooms, growing directly from the soil over the grave. The plants hadn't been there the day before. I'd personally walked that section during my rounds. The grave had been clear, just fresh-turned soil and the temporary marker. But overnight, jasmine had sprouted, grown, and bloomed. Ramon suggested someone had planted them. Maybe Patricia had come after hours, wanted to beautify her husband's resting place. But the flowers weren't planted. They were growing wild, roots deep in the soil, like they'd been there for seasons. And night-blooming jasmine doesn't grow in our region. Our climate is too cold. The plant requires specific conditions, temperatures that don't exist here in autumn. I called Patricia that afternoon, asked if she'd planted anything at Michael's grave. She said no. Then she went very quiet. "Jasmine?" she asked. "Yes, night-blooming jasmine." Michael was deathly allergic to jasmine, she said. Even the smell would send him into anaphylactic shock. I'd never bring that near his grave. I apologized, said we'd remove the plants. She thanked me and hung up. Ramon and I went to the grave that afternoon. We dug up the jasmine carefully, removed every root we could find. We replaced the soil, reseeded the area. By sunset, the grave looked normal again. The next morning, the jasmine was back. More of it this time. The entire grave was covered, white blooms so thick you couldn't see the soil beneath them. The scent was overwhelming, sweet, cloying, almost sickeningly strong. I checked the security footage. We have cameras covering the main sections, installed after a vandalism incident last year. The footage showed the grave at dusk clear, no flowers. Then, over the course of 3 hours, the jasmine grew. Not planted, grew. Time-lapse showed stems emerging from the soil, leaves unfurling, blooms opening. Impossible growth. But there it was on camera. I showed the footage to our landscaping contractor. He couldn't explain it. Said it was impossible, plants don't grow that fast. Suggested maybe it was a prank, some kind of artificial setup. But the flowers were real. I'd touched them, smelled them, dug them up myself. I called Patricia again, told her what was happening. She came to the cemetery that afternoon, stood at Michael's grave, staring at the jasmine. She looked pale, shaken. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said quietly. "Something I've never told anyone." I waited. Michael had an affair, 5 years ago. I found out 6 months before he died. He ended it, said it was a mistake, begged me to forgive him. She paused, tears in her eyes. I told him I did, but I didn't. I stayed angry. I stayed hurt. The last year of his life, I barely spoke to him. And then he died. And I never got to really forgive him. Never got to tell him it was okay. She knelt by the grave, touched one of the jasmine blooms. "The woman he had the affair with," Patricia continued. "Her name was Jasmine." The air felt colder. I didn't know what to say. "I think she's doing this," Patricia whispered. "I think she's still trying to reach him." I asked if Jasmine had attended the funeral. Patricia shook her head. "She's dead. She died 2 years ago. Car accident." That night, I stayed at the cemetery after closing. I wanted to see what happened when the jasmine bloomed. I positioned myself near Section 4, hidden behind a maintenance shed with a clear view of Michael's grave. The flowers started opening at 8 o'clock. The blooms unfurled slowly, releasing that overwhelming sweet scent. And then, I heard it. A woman's voice, soft, carried on the wind, barely audible. "I'm sorry." Over and over. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." I stood up, looked around. No one was there. Just me and the graves and the night. But the voice continued, drifting through the air, like the scent of the jasmine. "I'm sorry I ruined everything. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry." I walked toward Michael's grave slowly. The voice grew louder as I approached. And then I saw her. A figure, kneeling by the grave, translucent, barely visible in the darkness. A woman, young, mid-30s, wearing a light jacket. She was placing her hand on the soil, over the jasmine, and she was crying. "Please forgive me," she whispered. "Please, I never meant to hurt anyone. Please, forgive me." I didn't move, didn't speak. I just watched as she knelt there, sobbing, apologizing to a man who couldn't hear her. Then another figure appeared. This one more solid, clearer. A man, standing beside the kneeling woman. Michael Brennan. I recognized him from the photos at his funeral. He reached down, placed his hand on the woman's shoulder. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her translucent face. He spoke, but I couldn't hear the words. Too quiet, too distant, but I saw his expression gentle, sad, forgiving. The woman stood slowly. Michael embraced her not romantically, not passionately, just a brief, gentle hug. The kind you'd give to someone you care about, someone you forgive. Then they both faded. Not walked away, just faded, like morning mist in sunlight. The jasmine remained. I went home and didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Who would believe me? But the next morning, something had changed. The jasmine was still there, but it was dying. The blooms were wilting, the leaves turning brown. By noon, the entire plant had withered. Ramon cleared it away that afternoon. It never grew back. Patricia came to visit a week later. She brought flowers, roses, Michael's favorite. She placed them on the grave and knelt there for a long time. When she stood up, she looked calmer, at peace. I forgave him, she told me. I went home that night, and I sat by his photo, and I told him I forgave him. I meant it this time. I nodded, didn't mention what I'd seen. She looked at the grave, at the spot where the jasmine had been. Do you think he heard me? I thought about the two figures I'd seen in the darkness, about the embrace, the gentle forgiveness. Yes, I said. I think he did. Patricia visits every week now. She brings flowers, sits on the bench nearby, talks to Michael like he's still there. Maybe he is. Maybe he's listening. The jasmine has never come back. But sometimes, on nights when the moon is full, when I'm doing my rounds through Section 4, I catch the faint scent of it on the wind. Just a hint, barely there, and I hear it, soft and distant. I'm sorry. But now, mixed with it, another voice. I forgive you. And I think maybe that's all either of them needed. To say sorry, and to be forgiven. Some positions can't be explained away. I'm Beck, and I've been a handler at County Burial Services for 13 years. My job is disinterments, exhuming bodies for relocation, usually when families move or cemetery plots need to be consolidated. It's not pleasant work, but it's necessary. People die in one place, and their families want them moved somewhere else. I make that happen. I've seen a lot in 13 years. Deteriorated caskets, unexpected preservation, bones that shifted during settling. Bodies don't always stay the way we put them. Decomposition is unpredictable. Caskets fail. Soil shifts. I've learned not to be surprised by what I find when I open a grave. But Mrs. Catherine Hartwell's disinterment broke every rule I knew. The request came in through normal channels. Family relocation from Meadowview Cemetery to a plot in another state, next to her late husband who'd been buried there 5 years ago. Standard procedure. The family paid the fees, signed the paperwork, scheduled everything properly. Mrs. Hartwell had been buried for 18 months, recent enough that the casket should still be intact, the body mostly preserved. I've done dozens of disinterments at that time frame, usually straightforward. My crew started work on a Thursday morning. We excavated carefully, following protocol. The casket came up in good condition, sealed properly. No obvious damage. We transported it to our facility for the family's verification before reburial. Standard procedure requires us to open the casket briefly, confirm identity, document condition. I opened it that afternoon. Mrs. Hartwell was facing downward, not just turned slightly, completely face down. Her body was pressed against the bottom of the casket, her face against the satin lining, her back to the lid, like she'd been flipped entirely. I've been doing this work for over a decade. I've never seen anything like it. Bodies don't flip themselves. The casket had been sealed. There was no way she could have moved. But there she was, face down, her dress twisted around her, her hair spread across the lining. I called my supervisor immediately. He came down, looked at the casket, and went pale. "How is this possible?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. We examined the casket carefully. The seal was intact. No signs of tampering, no damage that would indicate it had been opened. The locking mechanism was exactly as it should be, engaged properly. No one had opened this casket since it was sealed at burial, but the body was face down. My supervisor called the funeral home that had handled the original service, spoke to the director, confirmed that Mrs. Hartwell had been positioned face up, hands crossed on her chest, standard presentation. The director was adamant. He'd positioned her himself, closed the casket himself, watched it lowered into the ground. Face up. Definitely face up. We documented everything, photos from multiple angles, measurements, detailed notes. Then we carefully turned her body back over. That's when we saw the damage. The silk lining on the bottom of the casket showed compression marks, deep ones, like she'd been pressed against it with force. And her hands, her previously manicured fingernails, were broken. Not just chipped, broken down to the quick, bloody at the tips. And embedded under the remaining nail fragments was wood. splinters of wood, and pieces of the casket's interior padding. Like she'd been clawing. My supervisor and I stood there in silence, staring at those broken nails, at the wood splinters, at the compression marks on the silk. She was buried alive, I said quietly. My supervisor shook his head. Impossible. She was embalmed. Death was confirmed. She was in the hospital for 3 days before she died. Doctors certified it. Then how do you explain this? He couldn't. We called the police. They sent a detective and a medical examiner. The ME examined the body, took samples, documented the nail damage. She was professional, efficient, but I could see the confusion in her expression. These injuries are perimortem or shortly post-mortem, she said. But that doesn't make sense. Embalming fluid prevents this kind of tissue response. And the time frame she's been buried for 18 months. These injuries should be fully decomposed by now, not preserved like this. The detective interviewed everyone involved in the original burial. The funeral director, the hospital staff, the cemetery workers. Everyone confirmed the same thing. Catherine Hartwell had been dead when buried, properly certified, properly prepared. But the evidence suggested otherwise. The family was devastated. We held off on the reburial, pending investigation. The daughter came to view the body, wanted to see for herself. I advised against it, but she insisted. When she saw her mother's broken nails, she collapsed. We had to help her to a chair. She was claustrophobic, the daughter said through tears, terrified of small spaces. She made us promise to cremate her. She didn't want to be buried. But my brother insisted on a traditional burial, said it was more respectful. My mother was already dead. I thought it didn't matter. She looked at me, her face pale. But what if she knew? What if she knew she was in that box? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The investigation concluded that Mrs. Hartwell had been deceased at burial. All medical records confirmed it. The broken nails, the face-down positioning, they were labeled as unexplained anomalies, consistent with post-mortem changes, and casket failure. The official report suggested the body had shifted due to decomposition gases and soil settling. But I know what I saw. I know about the wood splinters, the compression marks, the perfect face-down flip that shouldn't be possible in a sealed casket. The family cremated her after the investigation. She was interred next to her husband as ashes, not a body. I was there when we opened the casket for the crematorium. The daughter asked me to check one more time, make sure her mother was positioned properly, peacefully. I opened the lid. Mrs. Hartwell was face down again. I flipped her quickly, before the daughter could see, arranged her properly, closed the lid. I didn't tell anyone. The cremation happened that afternoon. Mrs. Hartwell's ashes were scattered in the ocean. The family found peace. But I've never found peace with what I saw. I've done 6 more disinterments since then. Every time I open a casket, I hold my breath, waiting to see if the body is face down, waiting to see broken nails and wood splinters. So far, they've all been normal. But I think about Mrs. Hartwell every day, about the claustrophobia that terrified her in life, about waking up in darkness, in a sealed box, unable to breathe, unable to scream, about clawing at the lid until her nails broke, about flipping herself over in desperation, trying to find a way out. And I think about how long it might have taken, how long she might have been aware, trapped in that casket, before true death finally came. I don't know if it's possible. Medical science says it's not. But I saw those broken nails, and I know the truth. Some burials don't end when the dirt covers the casket. Sometimes they're just beginning. Some rhythms echo from places we can't see. I'm Manager DeVries, and I've been running operations at Riverside Funeral Chapel for 21 years. The building is old, constructed in 1932. Family owned for 3 generations before we bought it. The architecture is beautiful hardwood floors, vaulted ceilings in the chapel, or original fixtures. It's also impractical. The offices are in the basement, beneath the chapel proper. Saves space, but it means working underground most of the day. I don't mind it. The basement is quiet, cool, good for focusing on paperwork. I usually work late accounts, scheduling, permits, the kind of administrative work that requires concentration. After the day staff leaves, after the last service ends and the families go home, the building empties. Just me and the silence. Except for the footsteps. They started about 6 months ago. I'd be working in my office, door closed, focus on spreadsheets or invoices, and I'd hear its slow, deliberate footsteps directly above me. In the chapel, someone walking in steady, measured paces. The first time I heard it, I assumed someone from the evening service had stayed late. Happens sometimes, family members lingering, needing a few more moments alone. I went upstairs to check, offer assistance, or politely let them know we were closing. The chapel was empty. The lights were off. The doors locked. I'd secured everything myself after the last family left. No one was there. I went back downstairs, returned to my work. The footsteps started again. Same pattern, same rhythm. Slow, deliberate, like someone pacing. The sound moved across the ceiling in a specific path, from the front of the chapel near the pulpit, down the center aisle, circling back, over and over. I checked upstairs 3 more times that night. Empty every time. I mentioned it to our maintenance contractor the next day. He suggested it was the building settling, old wood creaking, pipes expanding, standard explanations for old buildings. He checked the chapel floor, the support beams, the heating system, found nothing unusual. But the footsteps continued. Every night I worked late, I'd hear them. Always the same pattern, always the same path. I started timing it. The footsteps would begin around 8:30, continue for 20 to 30 minutes, then stop. Never varied. I pulled the building's history, looking for any incidents that might explain it. Riverside Chapel had been in continuous operation since 1932. Thousands of services. Thousands of families passing through, but nothing unusual in the records. No accidents, no deaths on the property, no tragedies. Then I found the service logs from 1976. There was an entry, handwritten, dated April 19th. Service interrupted. Joseph Caldwell collapsed during eulogy. Paramedics called, pronounced deceased at scene. The entry included a time, 8:37 p.m. I cross-referenced the name. Joseph Caldwell had been a funeral director. Not at Riverside, he'd worked at a competitor across town. But he'd been attending a colleague's service at Riverside when he collapsed, heart attack, died in the chapel, right in the middle of delivering a eulogy. I found his obituary. It included a photo. Elderly man, dignified, wearing a dark suit. The obituary mentioned he'd been a funeral director for 42 years, devoted to the profession, known for his compassion and professionalism. The footsteps I heard every night started at 8:30. The pattern I'd been hearing, the slow, measured walk from the front of the chapel, down the aisle, circling back, that was the path someone would take while pacing before a service. Preparing, rehearsing. I decided to test something. That night, I stayed late again. At 8:30, right on schedule, the footsteps started. I grabbed a piece of chalk from the maintenance closet, went upstairs to the chapel, and marked the floor where I heard the footsteps above my head. I marked the starting point near the pulpit. Then I followed the sound, marking the path as the footsteps moved, down the center aisle, to the left, circling near the side entrance, back toward the front. When the footsteps stopped, I looked at what I'd marked. A perfect circuit, the exact path someone would walk while pacing nervously, preparing to speak in front of mourners. I left the marks overnight, came in early the next morning. The chapel was undisturbed, doors still locked, but when I checked the floor, there was something new. In the thin layer of dust that had settled overnight, there were footprints. Faint, barely visible, but there. Adult-sized dress shoes, following the exact path I'd marked. Starting at the front, circling through the chapel, returning to the pulpit. I called our security company, had them review the footage. We have cameras covering the entrances and the parking lot, but not the interior of the chapel. Privacy concerns for families. The footage showed me entering the chapel at 8:30, leaving at 9. No one else entered. No one else was in the building. But the footprints were real. I photographed them, documented them. Then I cleaned them away. Didn't tell anyone. That night, I stayed late again. This time, I brought a voice recorder. I wanted audio evidence, something I could analyze later. At 8:30, the footsteps began. I hit record, sat at my desk, and listened. The footsteps moved above me, slow and steady. I could hear the floorboards creaking, the distinct sound of weight shifting from step to step. Then, for the first time, I heard something else. A voice. Faint, muffled by the ceiling, but definitely a voice. A man's voice, speaking quietly. I couldn't make out the words, too distant, too unclear. But he was talking, speaking in rhythm with the footsteps, like he was rehearsing something, practicing. I played back the recording later. The footsteps were there, clear and distinct, and beneath them, barely audible, the voice. Still too quiet to understand the words, but unmistakably present. I isolated the audio, amplified it, cleaned it up as much as I could with basic software. And I heard him, honored to speak today. Knew him well, devoted husband and father. Rest in peace. Fragments of a eulogy. Rehearsed, practiced, repeated. Joseph Caldwell, still preparing for the speech he never got to finish. I've been working here for 21 years. I've stayed late countless nights, but I've never heard those footsteps during the day, only at night, only when I'm alone, and only at 8:30 p.m. Last week, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I went upstairs at 8:30, stood in the chapel while the footsteps moved around me. I could hear them clearly right next to me, circling past me, moving through the space like someone real and solid was there. I spoke out loud, "Mr. Caldwell, you don't have to stay here. The service ended a long time ago. You can rest now." The footsteps stopped. The chapel went silent. Not just quiet, completely silent. No creaking, no ambient sound. Nothing. Then I heard the voice, clear this time. Close, right next to me. "I'm not ready yet. I need to get it right." I stood there, frozen. The temperature dropped. I could see my breath. "Get what right?" I asked. "The eulogy. I have to finish," I promised. The footsteps started again, moving away from me, back to the front of the chapel. The voice faded. "I've stayed late every night this week." The footsteps continue. Same time, same pattern. But now I hear the voice more clearly. Still practicing. Still rehearsing fragments of that unfinished eulogy. "Devoted friend, missed by all. May he rest in eternal peace." I've thought about trying to help him finish. About standing in the chapel and letting him speak through me, or reading the eulogy he never got to deliver. But I don't know how. I don't know what he needs. All I know is that Joseph Caldwell has been pacing that chapel for 49 years, practicing a speech he'll never give. And I don't think he'll stop until someone listens. So I stay late. I sit in my office, listen to the footsteps above me, and sometimes I go upstairs and stand in the empty chapel. And I listen, because I think that's all he really needs. Someone to listen. Some graves claim themselves before their time. But when I got to plot 23, it was already open. Not partially open. Completely excavated. 6 feet deep, proper dimensions, walls clean and squared. Fresh soil piled neatly beside it, covered with tarps. A temporary marker at the head of the plot bearing tomorrow's information. Grace Ellen Miller, 1946 to 2025. Tomorrow's date. The burial that hadn't happened yet. I stood at the edge, staring down into the empty grave. The excavation was perfect, better than perfect. The walls were completely vertical, no tool marks, no irregularities. Like the earth had simply parted, leaving a precise rectangular void. I checked my work order. Plot 23, Section 8. This was definitely the right location. I checked my schedule. The excavation wasn't scheduled until today. I was supposed to be opening this grave, not finding it already done. I called my supervisor, explained the situation. He sounded confused, irritated. "Did Rodriguez do it yesterday?" he asked. Rodriguez was the other sexton. I called him. He hadn't touched Plot 23, hadn't even been to Section 8 this week. My supervisor came out, looked at the grave, checked his records. Nothing. No authorization, no prior work order. According to every official document, this grave shouldn't exist yet. Maybe the family hired an outside contractor, my supervisor suggested. Some people do that. Premium service. But the Millers hadn't hired anyone. We called them. They were confused, said they'd only arranged service through Greenfield. No outside contractors. We decided to just accept it. Someone had done the work. Maybe a well-meaning volunteer, maybe a scheduling error we couldn't track. The grave was properly excavated, ready for burial. We'd use it. I covered the grave with boards and tarps, secured the area, moved on to other work. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The precision of that excavation, the temporary marker with tomorrow's date. Something felt wrong. I went back to the cemetery after closing. I wanted to see the grave again, understand what was bothering me. When I arrived at Plot 23, the tarps were disturbed, not removed. Disturbed, like something had moved them from beneath. I pulled them back, looked down into the grave. The bottom was no longer empty. There was an impression in the soil, a body-shaped depression, like someone had been lying there. The soil was compressed in the exact shape and dimensions of a casket. But there was no casket, just the impression. I climbed down into the grave, something I shouldn't have done alone, against safety protocols, and examined the impression closely. It was fresh. The soil was compressed in a pattern that suggested weight, recent pressure. And there was something else. In the compressed soil, near where a head would rest, there were small marks, scratches, like fingernails had dragged across the dirt. I climbed out quickly, my heart racing. I covered the grave again, left the cemetery. I didn't sleep that night. The burial happened the next morning. Grace Miller's casket was lowered into Plot 23 at exactly 10 a.m. The family gathered, the minister spoke. The graveside service proceeded normally. I stood at a distance, watching. When the casket reached the bottom of the grave, I heard something, a soft sound, like a sigh, like relief. No one else seemed to notice. The service continued. The family departed. My crew and I filled the grave, tamped the soil, laid the sod. Standard procedure. Normal burial. Except I kept thinking about that body-shaped impression, about the scratches in the soil. I went back to the office that afternoon, pulled the records for Plot 23, purchased by the Miller family in 2020. Reserved but unoccupied until now. I checked the cemetery's historical records, looking for any anomalies connected to that plot. Nothing. Clean history. Then I checked the soil composition reports. We do periodic testing for drainage and settling. The reports for Section 8 showed normal soil, clay-based, good drainage, stable. Except for Plot 23. The most recent soil report, done 3 months ago, showed an anomaly. The soil at Plot 23 contained trace elements inconsistent with the surrounding area. Specifically, elevated calcium, phosphorus, and nitrogen, the chemical signature of human remains. But the plot had been empty, unoccupied. I showed the report to my supervisor. He frowned, said it was probably contamination from an adjacent grave, runoff from older burials nearby. But there were no adjacent burials. Plot 23 was in a newer section, surrounded by empty plots. I couldn't let it go. That weekend, I went back to the cemetery with a soil probe, the kind we use to check ground stability before excavation. I went to Plot 23, now occupied by Grace Miller, and pushed the probe into the soil at the edge of the plot. It went down smooth, until about 8 feet. Then it hit something solid, Not rock, not clay, something else. I pulled the probe out. The tip was stained dark, and there was a smell faint but unmistakable. Decomposition. There was something buried beneath Grace Miller's casket. I excavated carefully over the next 2 nights, working after hours, alone. I dug at the edge of the plot, creating a narrow shaft parallel to Grace's grave. At 9 feet, I found it. A second casket, old, deteriorated, barely holding together. No vault, no protective container, just a wooden casket, buried deep, unrecorded. I stopped digging. I called the police. The investigation took 3 weeks. They excavated the second casket carefully, documented everything. Inside were human remains, female, estimated age 40 to 50, buried approximately 20 to 30 years ago. No identification, no records, no explanation. The forensic team ran tests, tried to identify her. No matches in any database. Jane Doe. But the burial date they estimated based on decomposition and casket deterioration was significant. She'd been buried around 1995. The same year, Grace Miller's husband had died. I found his obituary. Robert Miller. Died 1995, age 46. Sudden death, no cause listed. Buried at Riverside Cemetery across town. I tracked down Grace Miller's daughter, asked her about her father's death. She was reluctant to talk, but eventually opened up. My father had an affair, she said quietly. A woman he worked with. My mother found out. There was a confrontation. The woman disappeared shortly after. Just vanished. Never seen again. What was her name? I asked. I don't remember. My mother never spoke about it, but she was devastated, angry, broken. The daughter paused. My father died 3 months after the woman disappeared. Heart attack, they said. But my mother, she was never the same after that. She became obsessed with that cemetery plot. Bought it years in advance, visited it constantly. Even before she was sick, she'd go there and just sit, like she was waiting. I thanked her and ended the call. I thought about Grace Miller, visiting that empty plot for 25 years. Sitting beside a grave that looked empty, but held a secret 9 feet down. A secret she'd buried there herself. The police couldn't prove anything. The remains were too old, the evidence too degraded. They classified it as a cold case, possible homicide, unlikely to be solved. Grace Miller was buried in Plot 23, directly above the woman her husband had the affair with. And I think about that grave, already excavated before I arrived. Already prepared, with a body-shaped impression in the soil and scratch marks near where a head would rest. I think Grace was waiting there, making sure her final resting place was ready, making sure she'd spend eternity exactly where she wanted to be, above the woman who'd ruined her marriage, pressing down on her forever. The grave has settled normally since the burial. No issues, no anomalies, just another occupied plot in Section 8. But I walk past it sometimes during my rounds, and I feel cold. And I think I hear something, faint, distant, coming from deep underground, not from 6 feet down, from 9 feet down. A sound like scratching, like someone trying to dig their way out, but they never will, because Grace Miller is keeping them there. Some messages arrive exactly when they're meant to be heard. I'm Director Kim, and I've been running Memorial Gardens Funeral Home for 12 years. The work requires constant vigilance, managing staff, coordinating with families, ensuring every service proceeds with dignity and respect. We handle everything from intake to final disposition, and every step matters. Our security system is comprehensive. Cameras in every room except the private family areas, motion sensors, audio recording in the main halls, and prep rooms. It's not about distrust, it's about liability, about protecting both our staff and the families we serve. The system runs continuously, archived for 30 days before being overwritten. I review the footage periodically. Check for any issues, any procedural concerns. Usually it's mundane staff coming and going, deliveries, routine operations. But last month, I found something I can't explain. We'd had a veteran come through. Gerald Morrison, 83. Army sergeant, served in Vietnam. He'd been in a nursing home for the last 3 years, declining cognitively. According to his medical records, he'd been nonverbal for the last 3 years of his life. Complications from a stroke and advancing dementia. His daughter arranged a simple service. Military honors. Cremation to follow. Mr. Morrison arrived at our facility on a Friday evening. Standard intake documentation, identification verification, transfer to overnight holding in our climate-controlled preparation suite. He was scheduled for prep and cosmetology Saturday morning before the viewing. I was reviewing the week's footage on Sunday routine check when I noticed an audio anomaly on Friday night's recording. The timestamp showed 4:47 a.m. Saturday morning. Mr. Morrison had been in overnight, holding, alone, doors locked. The camera showed the room clearly, his body on the preparation table, covered with a sheet, motionless. But the audio picked up something. A voice. Male. Clear. And distinct. Tell them I made it home. I played it back 3 times. Same voice, same words, same timestamp. 4:47 a.m. I checked the staff schedule. No one had been in that room. No one had been in the building except our night security guard, and he'd been at the front desk the entire shift. I confirmed it on the entrance camera. The voice had come from the preparation suite, from a room containing only one person, Gerald Morrison, who had been dead for over 12 hours. I isolated the audio file, enhanced it, verified the timestamp. The voice was real, clear, not a recording, not interference from another source. It originated from that room, at that specific time. I called our security company, asked them to verify the system integrity. They ran diagnostics. Everything was functioning normally. No malfunctions, no audio bleeding from other sources. The voice was genuine. I didn't mention it to the staff. I didn't know how to explain it, but I couldn't stop thinking about those words. Tell them I made it home. The viewing and service proceeded normally on Saturday. Military honors, flag presentation, respectful attendees. Mr. Morrison's daughter spoke about her father's service, his devotion to country, the way the war had changed him. After the service, I pulled her aside. I didn't know how to approach it, what to say. Finally, I just asked her a question. Your father's time in the military, did he have any particular phrases he used? Anything he said regularly when he returned from deployment? She looked at me strangely. Why do you ask? I told her about the audio recording, about the voice at 4:47 a.m., about the words I'd heard. She went pale. Her hand went to her mouth. That was his phrase, she said quietly. Every time he came home from Vietnam, every time his plane landed, he'd call my mother from the base. Always the same time. His flights always arrived early morning, around 4:45 or 5 a.m. And he'd always say the same thing. Tell them I made it home. It was his way of letting us know he was safe, that he'd survived another tour. She wiped tears from her eyes. What time did you say the recording was? 4:47 a.m. She nodded slowly. That's when his plane would land. 4:47. I remember because I'd wake up for school, and my mother would be on the phone, crying with relief. And it was always just before 5 a.m. I showed her the audio file on my phone, played it for her. We both listened to her father's voice, clear and unmistakable, speaking words he hadn't been able to say for 3 years. Tell them I made it home. She broke down crying. Not from grief, from relief, from closure. He's finally home, she whispered. After all these years carrying Vietnam with him, all the trauma, all the pain, he finally made it home. I gave her a copy of the audio file. She thanked me, held my hand for a long moment, and left. The cremation happened Monday morning. Standard procedure. No issues. But I've listened to that recording dozens of times since then. I've analyzed it, questioned it, tried to find a rational explanation. There isn't one. Gerald Morrison spoke at 4:47 a.m. Saturday morning, 12 hours after his death. 3 years after he lost the ability to speak. He spoke clearly, coherently, with purpose. And he delivered the message he'd spent a lifetime delivering. I made it home. I've been in this profession for 12 years. I've seen countless bodies, handled thousands of deaths, processed every kind of passing imaginable. But I've never had someone speak to me from beyond death. Until Gerald Morrison. I still have the audio file. I keep it backed up, saved in multiple locations. Sometimes I play it late at night, when the funeral home is empty and quiet. And I listen to a dead man tell me he made it home. I don't know where home is. I don't know if it's heaven or peace or just the end of suffering. But I know Gerald Morrison wanted someone to know. He made it home. And now his daughter knows too. That's all that matters. Some messages don't need explanations. They just need to be delivered and heard.